It was a peaceful Saturday morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and the air was fresh with the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of a sunny day. 2-year-old Ethan, with his chubby cheeks and infectious smile, was out for his regular walk with his mom, Sarah. His tiny legs, clad in little sneakers, took eager steps along the sidewalk as he eagerly pointed at the birds fluttering overhead and waved at every passing car. Ethan loved these morning walks. It was his time to explore the world, his chance to discover everything that made the world around him so interesting. He was endlessly curious, always looking up at the sky to watch the clouds float by, or at the trees that seemed to whisper with the wind. His mom, Sarah, smiled at his enthusiasm. As a single mom, these quiet walks gave them a chance to bond and share a moment of peace before the business of the day started. That morning, the sun seemed to shine a little brighter, and the usual hum of neighborhood life created a comforting backdrop of normalcy. The occasional car passed by, people walking their dogs gave a friendly wave, and children played in their yards. The world was moving, but for Ethan and Sarah, time seemed to slow down, stretching out in this simple routine. Sarah kept a watchful eye on her son as he toddled ahead, eager to explore the next stretch of sidewalk. Ethan was so small, but his spirit was larger than life. He had recently learned how to say a few words, and whenever he spotted something new or exciting, he would point and say, "Look," as if discovering a hidden treasure. As they passed a row of houses with neatly trimmed hedges and well-kept gardens, Ethan's pace slowed. He seemed to be drawn to something, a subtle shift in the air or a noise that piqued his attention. Sarah, caught in the rhythm of their walk, didn't notice at first. But Ethan tugged at her hand, stopping in his tracks. "Mommy, look," he said, pointing at the tall wooden fence that separated one yard from the next. His eyes were wide, his gaze fixed on something on the other side. Sarah glanced over at him, expecting to see the usual squirrels or stray cats he liked to point out, but instead she heard a faint sound. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear at first, but it was there, an unmistakable whimper. A low, pleading sound that seemed to be coming from behind the fence. Ethan, oblivious to the source of the noise, bent down to get a closer look, his tiny fingers reaching toward the slats of the fence. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she knelt down beside him. She listened more intently now and realized that the sound was indeed coming from the other side. It wasn't a cat or a bird. It was a dog in distress. Ethan looked up at Sarah, his face full of concern. "Doggy?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed toward the source of the whimpering. Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. She quickly crouched down beside him, trying to assess the situation. She could see a patch of fur moving behind the fence, and the dog's whimpers were growing more desperate. Something wasn't right. Her heart pounded as she scanned the yard, looking for any sign of danger or a way to help. She noticed a few broken boards in the fence, and it became clear. The dog was trapped. As Ethan continued to point at the fence, Sarah felt a sudden urgency creeping up her spine. She could hear it more clearly now, the faint whimpering, almost like a cry for help. It wasn't the playful bark or casual whining of a dog wanting attention. It was something deeper, more desperate. Sarah's stomach churned as she looked at her son, whose innocent expression now mirrored a quiet concern. "Stay here, Ethan," Sarah said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder before standing up. She looked around, searching for someone who might be able to help. The street was fairly quiet, just the usual morning sounds of neighbors tending to their lawns and a car driving by now and then. No one seemed to notice the faint cry, but Sarah couldn't ignore it. Her heart raced as she tried to assess the situation from her position. The fence, tall and weathered by time, blocked any clear view of the yard beyond. She couldn't tell where the dog was or what might be causing the distress. Was it stuck? Injured? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, but the one thought that kept resurfacing was that the dog needed help and fast. Ethan tugged at her hand, his face scrunched in confusion. "Doggy's sad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was as though he could sense the gravity of the situation, even though he didn't fully understand it. "Yes, I think the doggy's hurt, Sarah replied, kneeling down to his level again. She ruffled his hair and tried to calm her own racing thoughts. We'll help, okay. But first, she needed to figure out how to help. She quickly pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed the number for animal control. As the phone rang, Sarah turned her attention back to the fence, trying to peer through the cracks. She could make out the shape of a large dog, its body shifting in a way that suggested it was stuck somewhere. The dog's cries were growing louder, more panicked, and Sarah could hear the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the wood as the dog tried to free itself. The operator answered, and Sarah quickly explained the situation, giving her best estimate of the dog's location. She could hear the calm, but reassuring voice of the animal control officer on the other end. We'll send someone right away, ma'am. Stay with the dog and make sure it doesn't try to free itself more. We'll get there as soon as we can. Sarah ended the call, but a feeling of helplessness lingered. She wanted to do more to help the dog right then and there, but she knew she had to wait. She looked down at Ethan, who was still fixated on the fence, his small hands gripping the wood. His innocent eyes stared through the cracks, as if trying to communicate with the dog on the other side. The dog's whimpers continued, and Sarah could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just a dog in distress, it was a creature in need of help, and she couldn't just walk away. There was a bond between them, even though the dog couldn't see her or Ethan directly. But in that moment, she knew they had to do whatever they could to help. As Ethan continued to watch the fence, his small fingers traced the cracks as though trying to reach out, offering comfort to the unseen animal beyond. Sarah could see his innocence, his pure desire to help, and it struck her deeply. For all his 2 years of life, Ethan already understood what it meant to be kind, to offer help without a second thought. Just as the seconds seemed to stretch on forever, Sarah heard another noise. This time, it was not the whimpering of the dog. It was a rustling sound, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel. Someone was coming. As the rustling sound grew louder, Sarah's attention snapped back to the fence. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The air seemed to grow thick with anticipation as the footsteps grew closer. And then, just as she turned her head to see who was approaching, she saw something move in the yard beyond the fence. It was a large dog, no, a German shepherd, struggling to free itself. Its dark brown eyes were wide with panic, and its body was contorted awkwardly. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw that the dog's leg was caught in one of the broken slats of the fence. The dog was trying desperately to pull its leg free, but every movement seemed to make it more stuck. The dog's fur was matted, as though it had been trapped for longer than it should have been. Its once lustrous coat now looked tangled and dirty, and its breathing was fast, shallow. The whimpers had turned into low, strained cries of discomfort. Sarah felt a sharp pang of empathy for the animal. She could see that the dog was in pain, and each futile attempt to escape only seemed to worsen the situation. Ethan, oblivious to the gravity of what was happening, continued to stare at the dog with wide eyes, his face full of concern. He didn't understand what had happened to the dog or why it was in distress, but the connection between him and the trapped animal was undeniable. Without a word, he pointed at the dog again, his small voice breaking through the silence. "Doggy hurt," he said softly. Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I know, sweetie. We're going to help, okay?" Her voice trembled as she spoke, a mixture of fear and determination rising within her. She knew she couldn't leave the dog trapped like this. It needed immediate help, and the sooner the better. She stood up, her eyes scanning the yard for any sign of help. There was no one around. The street, typically bustling with neighbors and morning joggers, now seemed eerily quiet. Sarah glanced at her phone, waiting for a response from the animal control service. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly. She had no idea how much longer the dog could last in such a state. Ethan, sensing his mom's growing anxiety, toddled over to the fence, his tiny hands gripping the wood as he tried to get a better look. His small face was pressed against the cracks in the fence, his innocent eyes locked onto the trapped dog. For a brief moment, it felt as though time had frozen. There was nothing but the soft breeze, the sound of the dog's labored breathing, and the quiet determination in Ethan's gaze. Then the dog's eyes met Ethan's. There was something about the way the dog looked at him, almost as if it recognized that the little boy was offering something precious, a moment of comfort in a time of crisis. The dog's cries softened, its body shifting slightly in an attempt to make itself more comfortable. It seemed to calm, just for a moment, as if the simple act of being seen, of being acknowledged, gave it a bit of peace. Ethan's hand reached out, gently touching the wood of the fence. His tiny fingers moved slowly, almost as though he were trying to comfort the dog through the barrier. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the most significant thing in the world. The dog's breathing slowed, and for a brief moment, there was a sense of calm between the two, a silent understanding. Sarah, still kneeling beside her son, felt her eyes welling up with tears. It was incredible, the way this tiny child, with so little life experience, could offer such profound comfort to a creature in pain. Ethan's actions were pure and unspoken, a reminder that kindness often comes from the most unexpected places. The sound of a car pulling up broke the stillness, and Sarah's eyes snapped toward the driveway. Help had arrived. As the car pulled into the driveway, Sarah felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly followed by a wave of uncertainty. The animal control officer had finally arrived, but Sarah still wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be able to free the dog without causing further harm? Would they be able to get to the dog in time? But before she could process any more of the situation, something caught her attention. Ethan, still standing at the fence, wasn't waiting for anyone else to act. With a quiet determination that seemed beyond his years, he took a step forward, his small hand pressing against the wooden slats. His wide, innocent eyes never left the German shepherd, whose body still twisted in an attempt to free itself. Ethan didn't say a word. He simply crouched down, his tiny knees hitting the ground as he sat on the soft grass. His attention remained fixed on the dog, and, in an unexpected move, he began humming. It was a tune that Sarah recognized immediately, one she had often sung to him at bedtime, a song meant to soothe him when he was upset. It was a soft, gentle melody that seemed to vibrate with an almost magical calmness. At first, Sarah didn't know what to make of it. Why was he humming? She watched, uncertain, until she realized that, in that moment, Ethan wasn't just sitting there. He was offering something incredibly simple but profoundly important: his comfort. Ethan's hum filled the air, a lullaby meant not for him, but for the trapped dog just beyond the fence. To Sarah's amazement, the dog, which had been whimpering and wriggling in distress just moments ago, stopped moving. Its frantic movements slowed, and it lifted its head slightly, as if listening. The dog's eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time since Sarah had spotted it, the animal seemed to relax. The sharp, panicked breathing that had filled the air just moments ago softened into gentle sighs. The dog didn't struggle anymore. It wasn't pulling against the fence, nor was it whining. It just lay there, its body still, listening to the calming hum that Ethan had offered with no words, no hesitation. The bond between them, this tiny, empathetic child and a frightened animal, was palpable. The moment was one of pure innocence, a quiet exchange of trust and understanding that transcended words. Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she realized that Ethan had done something far beyond what anyone would expect of a 2-year-old. He had somehow connected with the dog on a deep level, offering the only thing he had to give: his presence and his peace. It was as if, without knowing it, Ethan had become the dog's source of calm in a moment of utter fear. The animal control officer, who had just arrived, watched in silence, clearly moved by the scene before him. He approached cautiously, but Sarah could see the amazement in his eyes as he saw how the dog had settled down, its breathing no longer as frantic as it had been moments before. The officer knelt down beside the dog, gently assessing its condition. He looked at Sarah and Ethan and smiled, nodding his approval. "You've done something incredible here," he said softly. "This dog was terrified, but it's calmed down now. We'll get it out safely." Ethan, still humming quietly, didn't seem to notice the commotion around him. His focus remained solely on the dog, his little hand resting gently on the wood of the fence. There was no fanfare, no recognition needed. To Ethan, it was just what he had to do. It was as simple as comforting a friend. Sarah, overcome with emotion, knelt down beside her son and pulled him into a gentle hug. "You're amazing, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You really are." But Ethan, blissfully unaware of the praise, simply smiled up at his mom, his tiny hands still clasped together, his face full of innocence and joy. To him, the world was a place where you helped others, whether they were human or not, and where kindness could make everything a little better. As the animal control officer carefully worked to free the German shepherd from the broken fence, Sarah stayed by Ethan's side, her eyes never leaving her son. He was still humming softly, his little hands resting on the fence as he watched with an intensity that was both surprising and heartwarming. The dog, whose name was later revealed to be Max, remained calm and still, its breathing more regular now. It was clear that Ethan's quiet presence had worked wonders on the frightened animal. The officer, now focused on the task at hand, gently pried open the fence slats, carefully maneuvering Max's leg free. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her when she saw the dog's leg was only lightly scraped, a sign that the injury, while painful, was not as severe as it could have been. She watched the officer work, knowing that the danger was nearly over, but still she couldn't shake the feeling of awe at what Ethan had done. She glanced down at her son, whose wide eyes never strayed from Max. He was still humming, his voice now quieter, almost as though he were whispering the song just for the dog. Ethan's innocence and compassion had made all the difference, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for him. For a moment, the world around them seemed to pause, leaving only the sound of Ethan's soothing hum and the soft movements of the officer freeing Max. As the last of the fence slats were moved, the officer gently coaxed Max to stand. The dog wobbled a bit, unsure on its feet, but it didn't bark or attempt to run away. Instead, it turned its head, gazing at Ethan with what seemed like gratitude in its eyes. The connection between the two was undeniable. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek as she stood up, walking slowly toward the officer and the now freed dog. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice shaky with relief. The officer gave her a reassuring smile. "He'll be just fine. Just a little shaken up, but nothing serious. We'll get him checked out, but I think he'll be okay." He turned toward Ethan, who had stopped humming, his hands still resting against the fence. "You did something amazing, little guy," the officer said gently. "You helped calm him down when he needed it most." Ethan's eyes flicked to the officer, but he didn't seem to care about the praise. Instead, he took a small step forward and reached out his hand, as though inviting the dog to come closer. Max, who had been standing cautiously, took a hesitant step toward the little boy. The dog's eyes softened, and slowly, carefully, Max nudged Ethan's outstretched hand with his nose. Ethan giggled softly, his face lighting up with a smile. He hadn't been afraid of the dog, even when it was trapped and distressed. To him, Max was just another creature in need of kindness, and all it took was a simple gesture, a hum, a touch, to bridge the gap between them. As Max continued to gently nuzzle Ethan's hand, Sarah felt a lump in her throat. It was a beautiful sight, this tiny child, with no expectation of anything in return, giving his whole heart to a dog in need. Ethan had unknowingly done more than just comfort the animal. He had shown the power of compassion and connection, something that far too often gets lost in the noise of everyday life. The officer stood back, watching the scene with a knowing smile. "You've got a gift, kid," he said, nodding at Ethan. "You've got a big heart." Ethan, still grinning from ear to ear, didn't seem to care much about the words. Instead, he simply patted the dog's head gently, as if to say, "It's okay now. You're safe." Sarah wrapped her arms around Ethan, pulling him into a tight hug, feeling a rush of love for her son. "You're incredible," she whispered, holding him close. Ethan simply smiled up at her, his little face radiating joy. "Doggy happy now," he said, his voice full of contentment. To him, that was all that mattered. As Max gently nudged Ethan's hand, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. she watched the dog and her son interact, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. Max, still recovering from his ordeal, seemed to have found solace in Ethan's gentle touch. The dog's body language had shifted from one of fear and uncertainty to one of trust. His tail, which had been tucked tightly against his body earlier, began to wag slowly, tentatively at first, before picking up pace. Ethan's smile stretched even wider as Max's tail wagged faster. His eyes sparkled with joy as he looked up at Sarah. "Doggy happy now, Mommy," he exclaimed, his little voice filled with pride. To him, this was a simple act of kindness, something he did instinctively. But to Sarah, it was so much more. In that moment, she saw her son not just as a child, but as a young soul with an incredible ability to empathize and connect with others, no matter how different they seemed. The animal control officer, who had been quietly observing the exchange, spoke up again. "You've done more for this dog than most people would ever do. It's rare to see such a connection, especially from someone so young." He turned to Max, who was now slowly inching closer to Ethan, sniffing his small hands as if to express his gratitude. "I think this dog is going to be just fine now, thanks to both of you." Sarah nodded, still in awe of her son's ability to calm Max in a way that no adult could have. The officer carefully checked Max's leg one last time, ensuring that there were no serious injuries. With a soft smile, he stood up and looked at Sarah. "We'll take him from here and make sure he gets the proper care. But I have a feeling he's going to be just fine now that he's had some comfort." As the officer began to gently coax Max toward the vehicle, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Max, despite the ordeal he had endured, was now walking on his own, albeit slowly. His tail wagged slightly, and he glanced back at Ethan, who was still watching the dog with wide, unblinking eyes. The connection was undeniable. Ethan had somehow found a way to calm the dog, not through force or words, but through the simplicity of his presence. Ethan reached out again, but the officer gently patted his hand, signaling that it was time to let Max go. "He's going to a safe place now, little buddy," the officer said, his voice soft and reassuring. "But I know you'll always remember him." He smiled warmly at Sarah. "And he'll remember you too." As Max was loaded into the animal control vehicle, Sarah took a deep breath, feeling both an immense sense of pride and deep gratitude. She looked down at Ethan, who had been so focused on Max the entire time. His wide-eyed wonder was still present, but now there was a look of satisfaction on his face. "Mommy, we helped him," he said, his voice filled with the pure joy of knowing he had made a difference. "We sure did, sweetie," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You were amazing." With one final glance at the vehicle pulling away, Sarah took Ethan's hand and began to lead him back down the sidewalk. As they walked, Sarah reflected on the events of the morning. It had started out as just another ordinary walk, but it had turned into something extraordinary. Ethan had shown her what it truly meant to be compassionate and to offer help without expecting anything in return. It wasn't just the physical act of freeing Max from the fence that mattered. It was the way Ethan had helped heal him emotionally, just by being kind. "Maybe we can bring Max a treat one day," Ethan said suddenly, looking up at Sarah. His voice was filled with excitement at the thought of seeing the dog again, as though he couldn't wait to continue the connection he had made. Sarah smiled down at him, the warmth of her love for him filling her heart. "We'll see, buddy. We'll see." A few days after Max was freed from the fence, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had somehow changed. It wasn't just the relief of knowing the dog was safe. It was the way Ethan had reacted, the way he had so effortlessly reached out to help. She often found herself thinking about the connection between her son and Max, how that simple moment of kindness had touched not only the dog, but everyone who had witnessed it. On a sunny afternoon, as Sarah was in the kitchen preparing lunch, she heard a knock at the door. She glanced at the clock. It was just past noon, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Her curiosity piqued. Sarah dried her hands on a towel and went to answer the door. To her surprise, standing on the doorstep was the animal control officer, the same one who had arrived to help Max. He smiled warmly when Sarah opened the door, and beside him stood a familiar figure. "Max, the German Shepherd. "Hello, Mrs. Walker," the officer greeted. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to thank you again for what your son did for Max. It's rare to see such kindness, especially in a child his age." Sarah blinked in surprise. "I'm so glad to see you both. What brings you here?" The officer chuckled softly. "Well, after we took Max in, we did a full checkup on him. We discovered he was chipped, and we managed to track down his owner." He paused, a smile tugging at his lips. But his owner couldn't take him back. Max had been through too much, so we were wondering if you might be open to adopting him. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had thought about Max since that day, and while she hadn't expected anything like this, the idea of welcoming him into their home felt right. Ethan had been so connected with the dog, and the bond they shared seemed too strong to ignore. Max had already found comfort in their presence. Wow, Sarah stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected offer. She glanced down at Ethan, who was standing beside her, his little face lighting up when he saw Max. The dog, too, seemed to recognize him, wagging his tail eagerly and nudging Ethan's hand. Ethan's eyes widened with excitement, and he reached out to pet Max. Doggy came back. He exclaimed, his voice filled with delight. He crouched down, his small fingers gently stroking the dog's fur. "Doggy's my friend." Sarah's heart melted as she watched the interaction. Ethan's joy was contagious, and the idea of bringing Max into their home felt like the perfect next step. She could already see the bond growing stronger between them, and she knew that Max would be a welcome addition to their family. The officer watched them with a knowing smile. "It's clear that Max has found his place with you. We've had him in foster care for a little while, but he really seems to have formed a special connection with your son. I thought I'd bring him by and see if you considered giving him a permanent home." After a brief moment of contemplation, Sarah smiled and nodded. "We'd love to have him. Ethan has already shown him so much love, and I can see how much he cares for him." She crouched down beside Ethan, wrapping her arm around his small shoulders. "It feels like Max is meant to be part of our family." The officer's smile widened, clearly pleased with their decision. "That's wonderful to hear. I'll get the paperwork ready, and we can make it official." He turned to Max, who was now sitting contentedly beside Ethan, wagging his tail gently. "It looks like Max already knows where he belongs." As Sarah watched the officer leave, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Ethan's simple act of kindness had led to this moment. The moment when Max, the dog who had been trapped and in pain, found a new home and a loving family. She knew that their lives had changed forever that day, and that this was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. A few weeks after Max officially became a part of their family, the house felt different. There was a warmth in the air, a sense of completeness that hadn't been there before. Max had quickly settled in, adjusting to his new home and surroundings with surprising ease. His playful nature began to shine through as he spent time with Ethan, who had fully embraced his role as Max's best friend. The bond between them had deepened even further. Ethan would spend hours playing with Max in the yard, tossing a ball and laughing as the dog bounded after it with unrestrained joy. Max had come alive, his once cautious nature now replaced by the enthusiasm of a dog who knew he was loved and safe. Sarah had never expected to see her son form such a deep connection with an animal, but in the weeks since Max's adoption, it had become clear that their relationship was something truly special. There was an understanding between the two that transcended words. Ethan had a way of comforting Max when he seemed anxious, just as he had done that first day when the dog was trapped. And Max, in return, was fiercely protective of Ethan, always watching over him as though he knew he was meant to keep him safe. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the living room, she watched through the window as Ethan and Max played in the yard. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow over the scene. Max trotted around the yard, and Ethan, his laughter filling the air, chased after him with a ball in his hand. It was a picture of pure happiness, one that Sarah would treasure forever. Max had become more than just a pet. He had become a member of the family. And watching Ethan and Max together, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a simple act of kindness, a toddler's hum, and a dog in need. but it had led to something so much more. Later that evening after dinner, the family sat together in the living room. Max lay contentedly at their feet, his head resting on his paws, while Ethan snuggled into Sarah's side. The little boy's eyes were heavy with sleep, and his gentle breathing signaled that bedtime was near. Max, sensing the calm, rested his head on Ethan's lap, as though he too knew it was time for rest. As Sarah brushed a stray lock of hair from Ethan's forehead, she looked down at Max, who gazed up at her with soft eyes, his tail lightly wagging. She couldn't help but smile, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. The dog had been a symbol of hope and healing for their family. He had reminded them of the power of kindness, compassion, and the deep connections that could form between humans and animals. "Max is part of our family now, isn't he, Mommy?" Ethan mumbled sleepily, his little hand reaching down to stroke the dog's head. "Yes, sweetie," Sarah replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Max is part of our family. He's home." Ethan yawned, his eyelids fluttered and closed, and Sarah smiled as she held him a little tighter. The bond they had all shared during this journey, Max's rescue, his healing, and his adoption, had created something unbreakable. The love between them was not just for the dog or for her son, but for the spirit of kindness that had brought them all together. As she looked out the window one last time, Sarah felt at peace. The house, filled with the sounds of Ethan's soft breathing and Max's occasional snoring, was a place of love, warmth, and connection. The simple act of helping a dog had turned into a lesson for everyone involved, one that would stay with them forever. Together, they had found something beautiful in the unexpected, a family, reunited through kindness and the quiet, steadfast love of a boy and his dog.